Start recording. So Jamie, I will another brief introduction. Jamie Maxwell, a graduate of University College Galway, and currently working for the Natural History Museum in Dublin, and who's going to give us a talk on polychaete identification this evening. So I'll switch over to you, Jamie, and let you roll on.
Brilliant. Hello there. Thank you for that introduction. Okay. I'm going to give you a brief kind of no, what's happening? There we go. So just a brief introduction to me. I started out actually as a photographer. When I left school, I went and did a photography degree and worked in that for many years. And then in 2013, I took a career change and decided to go down marine biology route. So my first kind of love is deep sea and polychaetes. That was kind of what I did in my undergrad and for my master's. And that's kind of where I fell in love with these little weirdos. They're an amazing little creatures. So a lot of my work has been on deep sea polychaetes, but for my undergrad, I looked at the difference between infaunal communities underneath oyster beds, oyster farms, and on shores that didn't have oyster farms to see if there was any difference, and there wasn't. And then for my PhD, which I completed last year, I looked at Antarctic pycnogonids. I looked at their evolution and distribution and phylogeny in Antarctica. So it was a little bit of a jump from polychaetes, and another very weird group. I like weird groups. But back to polychaetes. So this evening, I'm going to give you a brief introduction to polychaetes. Look at some of their characterizing features. You know, what makes a polychaete a polychaete. There's also, as I will go through, they're an extremely difficult group to identify, particularly in the field, but hopefully I'll be able to give you some pointers on the major families and some common species that you'll come across on the shore. And then I'll give you some tips on photography, especially for, because you can't identify them in the field, but what to kind of photograph to then have a look later on to be able to maybe identify them a bit better. So, I spelled annelids wrong. The grey star. So they're annelid worms. So they're in the same group as earthworms and leeches. They're an extremely diverse group. And the word polychaetes comes from polychaete, which means many bristles. And as we'll see now, that's one of their characterizing features. They have these hairs all along most of them have hairs all along their bodies, which is the characterizing feature for them. There is roughly just over 12,000 species across 60 families. So as I said, very diverse. They are found from the intertidal right down to the deep sea. Pretty much every marine environment, there will be polychaetes found. Of the 60, there is actually, within 7 of the families, there are representatives which are found in freshwater as well, but they're very rare. So they are mainly a marine taxa. And in Ireland, we have around 400 Irish species. That number is probably much higher because the research into them and people actually looking for them is quite low. And also there's probably a lot of hidden diversity that we haven't come across yet. So what are the characteristics? Well, the main characteristic, one of the most obvious ones when looking at especially the large ones, is that they have a segmented body. So just like the earthworm, the body is made up of sections, and most of those sections are just repeats of themselves. In the larger ones, where you can see here, it's very obvious their segmentation. is very obvious on the body. When you come to some of the more different ones, it's not quite as obvious, but you can still see it along the back. As you'll see in some later on, there are some body adaptations where the segmentation, although it is there, it is not as uniform as in species that are seen here. Second characteristic is their parapoda, and these are fleshy appendages which are on each segment, on each side. And they can come in various forms and various sizes. Some are really, really obvious. And they can have two. They can have an upper and then a ventral and a dorsal one. But in various different species, they can either just have the top one or the bottom one. And then in some species, they've become reduced right down to just little nubs. But they are still there. Sometimes you need a microscope to see them, but they are still there. And the parapoda are what carry the chaetae, or the bristles. That's where they get their name from. And here's an example, a sea mouse, which is actually one we have here in Ireland, which is it's a large one. You can't, you could, this one, when you see it, it's can be up to 20 centimeters long, so it's quite large. And you can see the bristles all around the side, all the chaetae around the side here. They use it for locomotion, for anchoring their bodies either into their tubes or where they live. They are also use them for sensory. They have some sensory capabilities in some species. And in deep sea species, for instance, they're used a lot for finding their way around their environment. They use their chaetae. And they're also used in defense as well. They can be used to ward off predators because they're chitin and they can be sharp. You know, believe me, working with them, some of them they can pierce your skin, and that can be quite painful. On the right here, you can see some of the different forms that they take. So you can have very simple ones, which are just spikes, right down to ones which have feather-like, and various different other kind of endings to them. Some of these we know what they're for. Some of them we have no idea why they have adapted these kind of shapes. They can be divided into two main groups. You've got errant polychaetes and sedentary polychaetes. Your errant polychaetes are the ones which are hunters, scavengers. They are very mobile usually. These are the ones which will be moving around. They're the ones you'll encounter probably most in the intertidal, or at least see in the intertidal. That we have quite a few large species of errant polychaetes. And in these polychaetes, the segmented body, the parapoda, and the chaetae are usually very obvious and can be seen with the naked eye. And then you've got the sedentary ones, which are which build tubes or they burrow in the sediment. They don't move very much. And well, some of them won't move at all, and they'll settle from their larvae form and will never move again. You can see here two examples of them, and the ice cream cone worm, which we'll talk about later, build these beautiful cones, tubes out of sand. They're really delicate, but they're really beautiful. And then you got your fan worms here. These sedentary ones tend to have become highly more modified from the typical polychaete body plan, because they're not moving. They have kind of adapted their bodies and have a lot more variation in their body than the errant ones, and can grow some mad appendages, like you can see here with the spaghetti worm. They use them for feeding. And you can see here in this one here, when I was talking about earlier, the parapoda being reduced right down. Um, the parapoda is very hardly visible, but you can still see the cheetah here. There, you can see my laser pointer, right? So polychaetes are a very difficult group to identify, particularly in the field. A lot of the characters which distinguish between species within genre, within the genre, within the family, um, tend to be microscopic or very, very small. So you need to use a microscope to see them, which, unless you have a microscope in the field, you're not going to be able to do. Um, and it can be, in some species, it can be, well, you'll see in a little bit, the difference can just be in what the tip of their cheetae are, which you cannot see without a microscope. Added to that, they are within a species, you can have characters such as color, which are highly variable. The picture you see here, they're all a single species. They're all the one species. They just have a lot of different color morphs. So that can cause, and they would have been, a lot of those species would have been separate species. They were described as separate species until the advent of genetics, and then genetics came in and realized, actually, no, they're all the same species. They just like to be colorful. And then on the other side of things, you have ones which look extremely similar or can be identical. And again, with the advent of genetics, we've discovered that they are definitely different species. And sometimes these species, it's easy to identify these species in terms of, because then you go by location. So they've been separated by location. So you know, if you're finding this one in Ireland, it's this species. If it's in the North Sea, it's that species. Sometimes, though, these cryptic species all occur together, and when it comes down to genetic, you can't tell the difference until you to use genetics. And people have looked for morphological characters that differentiate these cryptic species, and they haven't found them. Some of them you will. Some you will find when people actually start to look properly, they'll find small characters that will be able to distinguish between them. And as I was saying, pretty impossible in the between some species. This is actually the difference between the honeycomb worm and the Ross worm, which are the ones which are sedentary ones that you'll see pictures of later, but they're the ones that have the honeycomb tubes. So you'll see round on rocks and stuff at low tide. But the only really way to tell the difference between these two is how the end of their cheetae are, which you can see there. And as I was saying, there is polychaetes seem to have across the globe, they seem to have a lot of cryptic species. So cryptic species are species which are identical or near identical, but are genetically very different. This is one that we have in Ireland, which was believed to be a widespread one pretty much all around the kind of North Atlantic and Mediterranean. And the advent of genetics has shown that there are at least 12 different species. We have 2, possibly 3 of them in Ireland. And furthermore, this worm is actually an invasive worm in South America. And when they did the genetics to see where it came from, because they weren't sure if it was, another variation that just hadn't been recorded, the genetics showed that it was most closely related to species in Europe. And also within the samples that they were taking in South America, they were also finding new cryptic species of European origin, which had made their way all the way to South America. So it could be that they're an interesting group. It's why I love them. So we're going to look at some of the errant worms. So these are the active hunters and scavengers. They tend to be large, and they tend to be the ones that you will come across on the shore. So they're the ones people most encounter most often. So the first one we're going to look at are catworms, and these are Nephites. This is the main genre that we have in Ireland, but catworms, because they look a little bit like cats when you look at their heads, and that's the easiest way to distinguish these ones. They also have no eyes, or visible eyes, to the naked eye. So that's a good one as well. If you have a large polychaete, which you cannot see any eyes on, and have this kind of cat-like shape to them, it's definitely a catworm. In the field, if you can't see this, if you have something dark, and you place them on something dark, it's the easiest to see them in the field. It can come up quite, as you can see on the white one here on the cat, see, it's little cat ears. We have, there's 7 different species that you're kind of encounter in the shallows. It is pretty much impossible to tell which one is which in the field. You have to bring them back and have a look at them under a microscope. The most common one you're probably going to come across is Homerbergii, which is the one here on the right. And it's probably the one that people will come across most often, but you wouldn't know without bringing them into the lab to have a look. So here's just kind of going through. They have a reversible pharynx, so that's their mouth, which they basically spit out and engulf their prey and then stuck it back in like a bag. They're pretty amazing. And as you can see, the 2 species here on either side, you can't really rely on the Cassia here. It tends to be kind of a white silver color, but I have also seen these ones here, the Homerbergii, pretty much the same color as well. So again, color is not very reliable in a lot of polychaetes. They tend to be quite, depending on what time of year it is, where they are in their breeding cycle, what age they can be kind of different tones and different colors. But you can see here as well, just very clear the segmentation. These are one of my favorite, the paddle worms. They're just beautiful worms. And their characterizing feature is that they have dorsal cirri, or the paddles, which are all the way along their back here. And these can be really as good. We have some quite colorful ones in Ireland, but in tropics and stuff, they just can be just amazing colors. They also have prominent tentacular cirri around their head, which you can see here. And they're very obvious to the naked eye when you see them. And again, they have a reversible pharynx as well. With the pharynx, they can sometimes do it as a kind of defense mechanism. So if you do have a live one on the shore and it kind of is doing that, it's trying to distract you with it and make itself, like a lot of things, make itself seem bigger and more fierce than it actually is. You'll see some laders which have the same pharynx, but they have some fierce jaws on the end of it as well. So within the paddleworms in Ireland, we have 2 common genera, the Phyllodeca and the Ilela. Sorry, I am very bad at that. And as you can see, they look quite similar. There is a way of distinguishing, and I'll go through between the 2 of them. as to how you do that. And this can be done in the field. So the dorsal cirri in Phylodosa, they're large, they're slightly asymmetrical, and when they are in water, the best way to observe polychaetes is when they're in water. When they come out, they kind of all their features kind of flop down. So if you are in the field and you are looking to look at polychaetes, bring out a small little tray that you can just place them in a bit of water. It's far easier to, and it's much nicer to look at them when they're in the water as well. And they will be more relaxed, and you will see them better. The Phylodosa are much larger as well, so they can have a body of up to 50 centimeters. Now, that's not to say you're going to aren't going to get ones which are 15 centimeters long, but as adult forms, they're much larger. And then the other genre, they're much smaller, and the cirri, they are much more symmetrical, so they're much more leaf-like. You can see here. And they hold them to the side rather than kind of over the back of the body. And then they're also different in their tentacular cirri. In the Phylodosa, they're longer, they're more robust, and they tend to have color in them. Whereas in the Eulilia, they're much smaller. They tend not to have color in them. And sometimes even if you're looking at them against white, but you won't see them. And then also their head, their prostrum. In the Phylodosa, it's much longer. They're not great photos here, but it's kind of longer, more horse-like, whereas it's rounder and shorter. This one here. Sorry, that should be down there. So these are the three main Phylodosa that we have. This is really obvious when you see it in the field. It's a beautiful green, and if you get it under the right light, you can that blue really pops. And you'll find these around, on stony shores. If you turn over large stones at low tide, they will be under there, and they will move. So they can move out of water as well. These species, they're not going to be just sitting there as a kind of lump. They will move around also in out of water, and they can move surprisingly fast as well. And you can, for these two, you can rely on the color. Phylomucosa, it is very striking. It's a white and black one, as you can see. And in the intertidal, there isn't really one which looks like it. If you're diving or snorkeling, there is ones which will be slightly offshore, which do look similar. But one way of being sure of this one is that it actually produces a mucus as a defense. So if you pick it up or put it in, it creates this mucus, and it's very obvious. You can kind of just see it in the picture here, how it's kind of got the mucus around it, and hence its name. And this is Elalula clavigera. This is the one that has cryptic species in it, but in Ireland, if you're on the west coast or south coast, and kind of round up into the Irish Sea, it's more when they've looked at it in terms of genetics, it seems to be mainly that around. And then as you kind of go up north, there is another cryptic species. With these, they're still called if you call it a species complex, because as I said, it's not wrong to identify these by the name, but what we do is we put complex after it because we don't know for sure which one it is, and then it shows to people later on that it is definitely this one, but it's definitely this species complex, but without, say, genetics or very detailed morphological examination, it's impossible to tell. They're beautiful worms. Like when they're out of water, they tend to look a lot greener than they are in water. And you can't see you can see the difference here between having a species in water. This would have been photographed in water, whereas out of water, all their paddles kind of flop down, and you don't get the nice effect that they do when they're actually in water. This is the other species that is quite common around Irish waters. This one has a nice kind of stripe down its back, which identifies it as being Aurora. And you can see here as well, it's kind of squat face. That's the characteristic of this genre. Or sorry, this genus. Again, these are the smaller of the species, so they are about 15. So they're still quite large. 15 centimeters long is how long they get to. But quite obvious if you turn over a rock and see them underneath there, you're going to see them quite nicely. This is one other one, which is Etonolomia, which is the only kind of pure white / translucent one that well, not the only one, but the most common one that you're going to come across of the paddle worms. And it's got its feature being you can see the paddles here. It's translucent, and it has this really distinct head as well. And the eyes tend to be very obvious in this one as well because of its nature. The next ones we're going to look at are ragworms. This family is very active hunters, and you'll see later their jaws. They're very robust worms, again, very obvious when you come across them. They're characterized by very prominent lateral antennae, which you can see here and here. As soon as you see any polychaete that has very large lateral antennae like this, you can be sure that they're a ragworm. Their parapoda are very well developed as well. The parapoda can be more obvious than the actual chaetae in this group. And their bodies they're robust, and they're also slightly flattened. So if you were to take a cross section through them, their bodies are oval rather than circular, and they have that kind of look of being slightly squished. As you can see here, one which is out of the water, and that kind of flattened body is quite obvious when they are out of the water. So if you do come across them out of the water, and again, parapoda are really obvious along here. And as I was saying, these ones have quite impressive jaws. And again, these are very visible with the naked eye. And they will use these. So if you do have a live one and you pick it up, it may try and bite you. It's not necessarily, they don't quite have the strength to cause any serious damage, but they'll try. So probably the most common, or the one which is pretty much found, go to any shore in Ireland, particularly as the name suggests around estuaries, but at any shore, it's not just confined to estuaries. You will find the estuary ragworm. The main character for these ones is that it has a very obvious blood vessel which runs all the way down its back. You can see even in the ones in the tub here, even from a distance, you can really see the blood vessel running down the back. It's not the only one that you can see this blood vessel in, but it's the one which is it's most prominent. It's really obvious in all of them, really. And if you are going down the shore and you see all these little holes, this is more than likely, if you were to dig up, this is what you'd find. The way you would tell the difference between these holes and say lugworms is they don't have the coils, the casts that lugworms have. So if there's no casts, it's most likely, and they're slightly smaller. So these guys live, they live in sand and mud. And so anywhere there's sand and mud, they will live. You can find them on rocky shores occasionally, and particularly if there is sand beside it, they will kind of travel when they're hunting. But so more often than not, if you encounter them, the best time to encounter them is just when the water is coming in, and when they start to emerge from their holes. But all of these guys, they can actually move a lot faster than you would think, and they're quite aware of their surroundings. They are hunters; they have good eyesight, so they will also avoid you as well. You got the king radworm. In the most prominent lateral antenna in this species, and it's long. It can be up to 50 centimeters long. These guys, they're particularly obvious. Their flattened body towards their head end. These guys come in a range of colors, as you can see in all these 3 or 4 photos here. Anything from green to pink to a slightly kind of copper green gold color that you can see here on the right. But yeah, the way it's these 2 lateral antennae in this species, which can be pretty sure that if you have that's you've got a king ragworm. And then you've just got the ragworm. The common name for this one is just ragworm. It's very similar, but it's smaller, and you can see the dorsal blood vessel in this guy compared to the king ragworm. And the way you would tell this from the estuary ragworm is that this guy comes in kind of that green, blue color. So if you have that color combination with the dorsal blood thing, you can be sure that this is just the ragworm. Oh yeah, that's the thing I said. Also, yeah, in the parapoda here, they're much thicker as well, much more swollen than in the king ragworm. But when you have small king ragworms, especially if they're that green color, it's a lot harder to tell the difference between the 2 of them in the field. And then the last one is, I think it's the last one. It's a slender ragworm, and this is it's probably my favorite ragworm. It's a beautiful little worm. And it's got this, if you get the light right on it, it's got this really gold color to it. And it is, as the name suggests, it's slender. It's a lot more kind of petite and delicate than the other ragworms. It can be about 10 centimeters long. And all of these are burrowers. They're all found in sandy environments or muddy environments. So they have holes which they live in, and they will hunt through the sand, and then they will also come out and hunt on the surface as well. The next group we're going to look at are scale worms. Now these across several different families. And they're so called because of the scales, their elytra, which are on their back. And these scales come in various different forms, various different sizes. They can be smooth. Some of them are really ornate and have like fringes to them, but they can also have things growing or at the top of them as well, different kind of mounts and crowns, and they're a nice group. And also they can be quite colorful as well. The easiest one to identify, and the one which is fairly common and you'll come across on the shore, is the gelatinous scale worm. And I think from particularly the middle photo there, you can tell why it gets that name. It has very large scales which go out cover its whole body when viewed from above, which are slightly see-through, and it gives that kind of jelly-like look. And as I say, when they're out of water, it particularly looks slimy. And they are about, you can get them up to about 10 centimeters, but they tend to be a little smaller than that. And you will find these in rock pools, on rocky shores. They won't find, well, you're not likely to find these in sandy environments, more likely to be on rocky shores than in rock pools. These are the ones I showed at the very beginning, Harmathoa imbricata. So Harmathoa, the genus, you can identify them because they have 15 paired scales that cover most of the body. And these, you best have a magnifying glass with these guys, and you should be able to count the scales in the field for them. As I said at the beginning, this is one which is highly variable in color and pattern that they have on their scales. So, and typically a lot of their patterns, some of the patterns look very similar to other species of Harmathoa. So again, these guys, you can get to genus in the field. Getting to species or distinguishing between the species is a lot harder. But again, beautiful little worms. Just to show kind of how, so the Harmathoa imbricata, you can just about tell with your naked eye the difference between that and other species, and it's in their eyes. For the Harmathoa imbricata, they have two pairs of eyes, and their most anterior ones, the ones to the front, in Harmathoa imbricata, occur right down the front of the face on these two little protrusions, whereas in all other species, both eyes are to the back of the head. Now, in life, they are covered by the scales. So unless they've lost it, you're not really going to be able to see this too well. This is again why the best way to identify them is to bring them back into the lab. This is another species of Harmathoa, which extends nuata. It has quite a consistent patternation on its scales. This kind of dark, you got one light side and a dark, kind of like yin and yang in a way. So the patternation is quite consistent. The coloration can be different. Harmathoa glabria is not one you're going to come across too often, or I haven't come across too often, but it is quite easy to identify. It's got these really smooth looking, quite translucent scales on its back, which have a kind of copper brown tinge to them, and really nice yellow golden cheetah which stick out. And then you've got another genus which has 12 pairs of scales. The Lepidoptus. There are two main species you're going to come across, Squamatus and Claudia. And these are fairly easy to distinguish in their coloration or their patternation. They have, the Squamatus has scales which are brown, red, orange, and don't really have very much striking detail on them. But if you look at them, they're spotted, and even spotted around them. Whereas in Claudia, they have this really distinct, nice patternation on it, which is quite defined. Also, the way to distinguish Claudia is that the scales don't quite meet on the back. So if you can see any part of or if you can see their back and between the scales, and it has 12 pairs of scales, it's most likely Claudia. And I think this is my favorite polychaete, the sea mouse. When you find them on the shore, unfortunately, they tend to be dead. It's when they wash up. They tend to be a little deeper. They live on sandy bottoms mostly, kind of in a couple of meters of water, right down to their ones which go right down into the deep sea as well. But they're really distinct. You can't the sea mice. You can't confuse them for any other group. And they're called sea mice because they look furry and they're large and they have kind of. I think they're cute. Their cheetah can be real rainbow colors as well. If you get it in the right light, beautiful, beautiful. I was going to say little polychaetes, but these are big polychaetes. Whereas when you come across these on the shore, they tend to be dead. They're dead ones which are washed up. So these are glycerid worms. There are several types, but the easiest way to tell these is they've got very distinct rostrums, very distinct noses, and they come down into a very dagger-like head. There are several different species that you can't tell the difference between without getting under a microscope. These are another ones which have quite impressive jaws. They have 4 sets of jaws on the end of their pharynx, which they shoot out. These guys aren't quite as big. These aren't going to give you they're not going to do you any damage, but they look quite impressive. So they're the main types of errant. Well, sorry, some of the polychaetes that you're going to come across on the shore. So we're going to look at some of the sedentary ones, the tube makers and the burrowers. These guys have a lot more modified bodies because for making tubes or making burrows. The telomorphas, these are the tube builders. These are the ones the ice cream cone worm is in. And there's three families which are most commonly going to come across in Ireland, and they're fairly easy to distinguish between the three. So you've got the ice cream cone worms. They have a ice cream cone tube, as their names. They're sometimes also called trumpet worms, or some people call them trumpet worms. And they have this ice cream cone tube and a thick, stout body within it. Where if you find one of the tubes and they're still in it, and you look at the top, you'll see, if they're not closed up, you'll see these beautiful long cheetae that they have on their head. In a lot of species, they are this really gold color. They're really, really, really obvious. And they live in their tubes actually down, face down. So the top of the ice cream tube sticks up, and they live in sandy environments, sandy, muddy environments, mainly sand. And you will see these tubes, I think I have a picture later on, if there's been movement of sand, so like after a storm or something, you can sometimes come along and you'll see the top of the tube still sticking out of the sand if they haven't reburied themselves. And they will move around a little bit in the sand, but what they're mainly doing is just head down and looking for food, particles within the sand. And then you've got the spaghetti worms, Cerebellidae. They have, again, stout bodies, or their anterior, their front part of their body is quite stout, and it tapers down into a long tail. The most obvious thing about these and where they get their names is their spaghetti-like tentacles and their feeding tentacles, which come from their head. Now, if you get a live one, they're very obvious. When they die, these tend to break off quite easily. So they can kind of resemble the ice cream cone worms a little bit. But if they have a really long tail, you can be sure that they are the spaghetti worm. The other thing that they have is brachia, gills, which are very obvious in a lot of the species, and they have various different forms, like big branching ones or ones with big leaf kind of like ones. And again, in the live animal, these are very obvious. And then the third family, the Amphiferretidae. They are quite similar to the spaghetti worms, except that their feeding tentacles are much shorter, and their gills are very small, if you can see them at all. They don't have the big obvious gills, and they have a much shorter, thinner body than both other families. Their feeding tentacles tend to be a little bit more robust than the spaghetti worms, so they tend to retain them even in death. Also, you can see with these guys they are not uniformed all the way along their body. All of this family, they're not uniformed the same as all the rest of the polychaetes we've just been looking at. They have different sections to their body. So they have a thorax and an abdomen. Their parapoda and cheetae have been vastly reduced down to little flaps, and their cheetae are just little small, tiny short ones, and you can't really see them with the naked eye. So this is the ice cream cone worms. The only species that, as far as I'm aware, that we have here is Lagos carina. So there's no mistaking this guy if you find it. It is Lagos carina. And you can see there its tube out of the sediment, what's called ice cream cone or trumpet. And then here's one that's been exposed, and you can still see the animal is still in here. Still see it through the light. Showing its beautiful cheetae up here. And they are that gold in life. They're pretty spectacular. And you can see also as well, just saying that the parapoda are vastly reduced, and your cheetae are just little small ones here. and they would use the cheetah here to anchor themselves within the tube. Spaghetti worms. These guys also build tubes. They build their tubes with their head up. And I'm sure you've seen these on the shore. This is the Conchilega, which is a really common species around our coast. It's got these very long feeding tentacles, which again, this one here is one which died. The tentacles are not obvious / gone, but they've got this striking red stripe down their back, and you can see here how actually long their body is and how it just tapers down. But you'll see these the shore, particularly again after there's been a bit of wave action, and it brings the sand level down or shifts the sand a bit. So when you see these, you can be, and they can occur in quite high numbers actually on shores. And then this is another species that we have, but this actually builds its tubes attached to rocks. So it is not a sand. It doesn't live in the sand. It attaches tubes to the rocks. So it makes its own kind of cave. Quite easy to tell between the two species here that we have. It lacks the red stripe, and also its brachiated gills are really obvious, quite massive. So yeah, if you find this, if you find it in rocky environments and it doesn't have that red stripe, as I say, the gills and the tentacles, feeding tentacles, can be lost quite quickly after death. But if this is in the rocky environment, you can be pretty sure that it's Neoamphitrhytis figilis. Probably one of the most beautiful of this group, the strawberry spaghetti worm. Again, this here you can see this makes its tubes against rocks and under rocks. So if you turn over rocks at low tide and you see tubes like this attached, it could be one of either the last two species we looked at. But there's no, this worm is beautiful, and it is quite unique in terms of being, when you see it, and you can see why it's called the strawberry spaghetti worm. And just one other one here, Polychaetes, which is quite translucent. You can see through it. It has a lot of feeding tentacles, like disproportionately amount for the size of its body. And yeah, it's quite unlike any of the other ones we've seen. And again, this is probably the one on the right is probably the most likely way you're going to come across them is when they've perished, unfortunately. But you can see them as well if you find something. You can see here they do have their tentacles, their feeding tentacles out. So if you do find them on a rock and it's a big enough rock that you can kind of submerge in water, you put it down and wait a while, they can come back out. And this is one which is a relatively new to Irish waters, Lepidoptera. Now this is, whether it's alien or invasive, I'm not sure. It could be that it has moved up from West Africa from just with warming waters, and it's now able to live here, or it could have also come up by ship's ballast or something like that as well. But that is starting to be, well, I think it's been about 10 years now. It's been recorded in Ireland, and it's being found along our shores. As I say, whether it's invasive, whether it's having any negative impact on native species, I'm not aware of any research or evidence that it is, but that doesn't mean it isn't. But I don't think there's any evidence yet to say that it is. And it's spread up into places like it is spreading. It is found further north than it used to be. So I don't know. I personally think it's a natural, or it's a climate change move rather than being necessarily introduced. And that it's just kind of moved up as the waters become habitable for it. Doesn't mean it won't come invasive though. And this is the last group, the Apophera Etididae. I have two main species that we've got here. They are fairly easy to distinguish between the two, in that this guy has, the Palmata has lovely striped tentacles, feeding tentacles. They're both quite see-through though. And then one last, I think this is the last tube building one that we have, which is quite a unique worm. So this is the parchment worm. And this is so called because of, here on the right, you can see this tube it builds, which people thought was quite like parchment. And this tube they make within the sand. So they have a U-shaped tube, one end each kind of just below the sand surface, just poking up through the sand. And they will live in this their entire life. And they settle and they build this tube out of mucus and surround their body. You're probably more likely to come across the tube than you are the worm. As I say, they don't leave their tube. That's where they are their whole life. But if you do come across the worm, there's no mistaking it. It has, and you can see this is really a lot different from the standard Polychaete body plan. Very strange, and they're also quite translucent or see-through within their, I guess their abdomen, and you can see right through them. Again, you're probably more likely to come across their tubes than you are the actual worm itself. And these are probably every kid, everyone is aware of lugworms, or they're cast at least on the beach. We have two species in Ireland. Many people will never see them unless you're a fisherman. They're used for bait quite a bit. You have Arnicola marina and Arnicola diafondines. The black lugworm. So the way to tell the difference between them, if you're just going along the beach and you can just see their casts, you can actually tell the difference between which species is underneath it. The marina has a disorganized cast. It just comes out and it can be just an absolute mess. There's no rhyme or reason to it. It shoves it out. Whereas the black lugworm has they're coiled, and they tend to be little tight coils. They also tend to be black in the black lugworm. Not only is the body black, but the cast will be black. And this is because, as a species, they actually burrow much deeper than marina. So they're down into the anoxic sand layer. So they're bringing that anoxic sand up to the surface in their casts. They also will live, they can occur together, but the marina tends to live on more sheltered shores, whereas the black lugworm can live on more exposed shores. And that's purely because the black lugworm, it's deeper, it digs deeper. So on exposed shores where there's more waves, there's more sand shifting, they're less affected by that because they're actually below the level of the shifting sand. Whereas marina is shallower, so any shifting in sands is going to expose them. So they tend to be more on sheltered shores. With marina, they do come in a variety of colors to near black, white down to pink. There's to red to and everything in between black and kind of pink. Along the red spectrum, they can be that color. But as I said, the easiest way to tell when you're going on the beach without having to dig them up is to look at the cast. Another tube dweller. I think probably, again, everyone's probably seen these and not realized that they are polychaetes. The sinestral spiral tube worm. They are most commonly found on brine seaweeds and can be found in large numbers. But they also will attach themselves to rocks and bivalve shells as well. There are several very similar spiral tube worms, but I think these are kind of the most common or the most obvious because they attach themselves to the brine seaweeds. See there in the photo. These are the honeycomb worms I was talking about at the very beginning. So these guys live in colonies and can form quite large ones. And they form them in between rocks or attach themselves to rocky outcrops. And they have this honeycomb appearance when you look at them, hence their name. The worm itself, as I said, distinguishing between the two species is not easy. The honeycomb worm, though, is very obvious for their tubes. They're the only ones that produce this kind of real honeycomb shape. And the other species, they have a more circular. They tend not to be in the intertidal. They tend to be a little shallower. Although their juveniles will start to build tubes in the intertidal, but they are more tube-like rather than this kind of honeycomb. And these can be quite ephemeral in terms of the colonies. They can be there one day and gone the next, particularly if a storm comes along. But they also can build them quite fast. And as I say, they can occur as quite big reefs. And the fan worms, which we have quite a few species of and quite a few families. No, sorry, quite a few genre. Probably one of the most common ones that you're going to come across is the one here on the left. It's quite dark to brown. It likes its tube within the sediment, and can be found in seagrass meadows quite a bit. Whereas and it has one single fan around. Then you got the Biospira, which has two spirals, two fans. And it also builds long tubes which stick out from the sediment. So they're quite just easy to distinguish in this case, and they're quite large. The problem with these guys is that they are very reactive and they will down into their tubes as soon as anything falls across them, any shadow or anything falls across them. So sometimes to find these guys, you just have to be still and just wait for them to come back out again. And these guys you'll pretty much only ever find them just a little bit subtidal or in rock pools or at spring tides when the water is at its lowest. You may find them along there. But the main way to see these, they will be wading through the water, which, as I said, they're very active. They will retreat very quickly. But if you're snorkeling or diving, there's a good chance you might see some. The one on the right here is the peacock worm, and then you've got Branchiocoma bombax. They're quite similar in that they have this kind of reddish stripes to them going up their fan. But the easiest way to tell them apart is their tube. In Bomix, they have, couldn't get a good photo of it, but they have a rigid, rough tube, which has little to no flexibility in them. Whereas the peacock worm has a smooth, flexible tube, which tends to be a little longer as well, straw-like. But if it's smooth and flexible, it's probably a peacock worm. Whereas if it is rigid and rough, it'll be Bomix. You can kind of see they have eyes on the end of their tentacles on the end of the feathery fans, and that's how they can react so quickly and retract if anything comes. I would say eyes, they're not eyes that can see picture, but they can detect light and shade. So you're right in the field. You have these polychaetes. As I said, they're not easy, especially when they're live running around. So I'm going to give you a couple of tips on how to kind of improve or just look at them more closely. So I think I mentioned before is if you are going out and you want to look at polychaetes, or to be honest, any marine invertebrates, you're always going to be able to observe them better in water. So just bring out a little, food tray, anything, a little bit of Tupperware, bring it out with you. You can put a little bit of water in and put them in. It's going to relax the animal. You're going to get a better photo or just better observe it. If you can have one which has a coloured base on it, I personally prefer black than white, but both work. And this guy is just in a little bit of water. Just makes him easier to look at. The other thing then is as well, particularly if you want to ask someone to identify or get a question or ask someone, is having something in the photo which gives you a scale, in this case a ruler, because it can be hard to tell from photos how big or small an animal is. Again, it's hard to say. So if you don't have a ruler with you, a great thing is a coin, because all coins are pretty much standard size, so you can tell immediately. And this is one of the ice cream cone worms on its side. But a coin does great. And that just means that you can actually get a sense of what size the animal is for anyone who wasn't there at the time with you. If you're using the macro setting on your phone, that'll mean that you can get closer to the animal. Or alternatively, if your phone does not have a macro setting, use zoom. So zoom in a little bit. This has two things. If you zoom in, it means that you can have your phone a little bit further away. A little bit further away, you zoom in, it means it's not going to disturb the animal, depending on what type of polychaete it is. They can be quite, as I said, reactionary to humans. And by zooming in, you just get that little bit more closer, essentially. Or get one of the macro lens adapters for phones. Buy pretty cheap on the internet. You put them over the top, and they actually, some of them are, you can actually get real good macro close-up photos using them. And if you combine this, as I said, with them being confined in a little tube or a little tub of water, it restricts their movement. So you can get some really nice photos. And then if you want validation or you want it yourself, you want to go back and you go back home and have a look, see if you can identify it further. The best thing to do is to get a full body photo and try as best you might to get a head photo and what the head looks like, and then as close as possible to a part of the midsection as well. These are kind of the main. This will be able to you'll be able to distinguish between genre, rather than maybe between species, but you might be able to get down to genre level with it. So here are two resources. The top one there, I use quite a bit, the Northeast Atlantic Marine Biology Analytical Quality Control Scheme, and they have keys for all the families for species and to get into genre or species, or genus or species. Some of it is you'll have, as I say, impossible without a microscope, but you can sometimes get it at least down to genius level. And a lot of the keys that they have up there will also have pictures as well. There's a lot of terms in Polychaete taxonomy for all the different types of bristles and different parapodal shapes and everything. So it is a lot, but if you are interested, I'd recommend that. And then the A-Photo Marine is where I got most of the photos. And this is a really nice site, actually. It's a guy who's taking photos of marine animals. And it's a good visual guide. I'm not for if you want to look it up and you have an idea of what you're looking at. There's quite a few really nice photos of the different species in there. So yeah, I don't know what time it is, but I feel like I rushed through that. Anyway, I hope I didn't bore everyone. Does anyone have any questions?